How does a person answer why something happens?
When you look at the findings in different fields,
scant is the part of life in which we live.
To attain the highest values.
The very first guest I had on the show was someone who's Paul Lacrone is like a tournament level Smash Bros Melee player, and so
cool.
We talked a lot about gaming and like how much he learned from it. Chris Sparks, another guest on the show and a friend of yours, we talked at depth. He was Gin Rummy, and then like he also played a lot of like games before that, and then obviously that informed a lot of his poker. What are some of the lessons you drew from gaming that you applied and still apply today, maybe?
I think one of the most powerful ones is the value of like finding the ideal difficulty. So there's many different types of games you can play, right? So on one end, you've got like a pure RPG, right? Like Mario would be an example of an RPG, right? Where the game does get more challenging over time, but it's not based on your skill. That's just like a pre-designed difficulty built into the game. And, as you're playing it and then you eventually finish it, and then you could go back and like play it again, but you've sort of like completed the game. Those are fun to me, but they never like stick for that long because the challenge is fixed. And I've always found that once I figure out how to win a game, I'm no longer interested in playing the game. I don't even have to actually finish it or actually win it. Like once I understand the rules and like which levers to pull to like gain the competitive advantage, and if I know that I'm going to win, I no longer want to play. It's boring. So something that I've thought about a lot is, I like life is the ultimate game, right? Like Finite and Infinite Games, great book for anyone who hasn't read it. Like life is the infinite game, and the goal of an infinite game is to continue play of the game. And the best way I've found to continue play of a game that is interesting and compelling is to make sure that it's always at the right difficulty level. So the cool thing with StarCraft and with Dota 2 is they had like dynamic matchmaking based on your skill level. So the game could assess how good you were, and then it would try to pit you against somebody basically right at your skill level, which for those games, since they had millions of players, was pretty doable. So you were, in some ways, playing against an opponent, but you were also playing against yourself. Because if you weren't continually improving upon your skills, then you would never like move up in the rankings. And they have, rank systems to show you where you are in the leaderboard. And it was like this big goal and like project of mine, basically, to get to like the top 1% of StarCraft 2 players. And I was like so happy when I got there, right? And like doing that required like figuring out how to learn, right? Because like keeping the difficulty at the right level is really important for continuing motivation to play, continuing to learn. But you also can't just like beat your head against the wall to make progress. Like there was a bunch of other people who I played with for about the same amount of time, and I would typically progress through kind of like the ranks and skill levels of the game quite a bit faster because I actually played less, but I spent more time like studying what the pros were doing and figuring out like, what build orders are they doing? How are they responding to the new balance changes? Like what units are they prioritizing? Like how are they managing their like APM in order to control like the rest for the right time? Like what things are they doing that seem strange, but actually like end up making a lot of sense? And that gave me a huge competitive advantage. So that really, I think, taught me a bit of like, oh, you can learn a lot just by like watching what successful people are doing. But also not necessarily like asking them what to do.
So this kind of, for me, comes to this idea of the semantic tree of knowledge, right? The like focus on the trunks as opposed to the branches or the leaves, which is sort of, so especially at the very beginning, I think throughout your career have done a great job of this, of sort of constructing your own curriculum. It's funny, it's interesting to hear you say that you wish you'd done it sooner. Like you probably could have dropped out as well. Is another whole topic. Like we put a negative connotation on that, you've like dropped out of college. But this idea of sort of building your semantic tree of knowledge. So ruling out what you don't like, doubling down on the things that you do like. How did you first start doing that? Because I think a challenge for a lot of people is like, because it's a time commitment, right? So you have to like know that time is gonna be worth it. Like, how do you know that before you dive in?
I don't think you can. I don't know, right? Like it's weird because there was definitely some shift that happened when I dropped out of the business program and started doing philosophy. And I don't know what drove that shift, but as soon as I wasn't playing like the stupid game that everyone else was telling me to play, I was suddenly a lot happier and really wanted to just like learn stuff and explore things on my own, right? Like I dropped out of the business school because I hated the business school, but then I started reading business books in my free time, right? It's like there's a big difference between doing something because you want to do it and doing something because you have to do it. I mean, we just had this experience where my wife and I were on vacation in Mexico when the Austin freeze hit. And so we couldn't fly back for like 4 days. And so we're on this like beautiful beach in Cancun, like totally idyllic vacation setting. And I was like really unhappy because it was just like so much harder to enjoy being there when you didn't have a choice, right? When it wasn't like, oh, I want to be here. It was like, oh, I literally can't go home. So I think that, you know, that choice factor is so important. And if you're picking something because like, oh, Nat and Andrew said that if you study programming, then like you'll have great career options and make a lot of money someday, like you're probably not going to get very far with it because that's not going to be a strong enough motivator. So, and the nice thing is that we're in a world now where you can be interested in like the most ridiculous, like seemingly unmonetizable stuff, and you can still make like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on it. Like, I don't think Encore from Teachable uses this story as much anymore, but I remember like in the early days of Teachable, he would always tell this story about how like one of the highest earners at the time was making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year teaching Japanese rope bondage on Teachable. Right? And like,
that's amazing.
Yeah, you don't think that your like BDSM interest on the side is going to turn into a 6-figure income, but like it can now, right? That's the world we live in. So I think that like just figuring out kind of like what that interest is that can be that infinite game, and then just spending a lot of time playing it and assuming you'll figure out how to get paid for it eventually is like not a bad strategy. Now, I mean, that said, it doesn't mean you should like be stupid financially, right? Like I had the big benefit of kind of like seeing this path sophomore year of college. So I had 3 years to kind of figure something out. But honestly, I did most of the work. Like, I guess I kind of did it all. I don't want to create a false narrative here. I was working on it really all 3 years in some capacity. And so I had the benefit of that, like that safety net, right? Because if something I was working on failed, then like, well, I was still just in college. There were much lower expectations. So if you've got a kid and a mortgage and whatnot, like you can't be quite as risk taking, but there's always going to be a way to squeeze in an hour or two of like making progress on something in the morning or evenings.
Yeah.